Lena Walker never thought a stranger's shoulder could be her safest place, until she woke up to find her daughter's $60,000 medical debt was paid by the man she leaned on in her sleep. The flight attendant's voice echoed faintly in Lena's ears as she staggered through the narrow aisle, clutching her purse tightly to her chest. It was a routine flight, just a quick hop from Miami to New York. But for Lena, every step felt like a battle. She hadn't slept in days, juggling 2 shifts at the diner, caring for Maya, and barely scraping by with the little money she had left. The world around her blurred. The endless conversations, the tapping of laptop keys, the quiet hum of passengers too absorbed in their own worlds to notice her. None of it mattered. All that mattered was Maya, the $230 prescription she couldn't afford. The medical bills piling up. The feeling that no matter how hard she tried, she could never catch up. "Ma'am, you're in 24B, the flight attendant called again, snapping Lena from her fog. She nodded and shuffled forward, her knees aching as she moved past rows of busy professionals, sipping their coffee, typing on their laptops, absorbed in their own busy worlds. Lena could barely keep her eyes open. She could barely focus on anything except the thought of finally getting some rest. When she reached her seat, she saw the man already in the window seat. His profile was sharp, his jaw strong, his posture perfect. Even in the soft lighting of the plane, there was something about him that screamed wealth. The suit he wore, dark, tailored, and expensive, probably cost more than Lena's rent. Lena swallowed, her throat dry. She hesitated before speaking. "Excuse me." The man looked up. His eyes were almost black, intense in a way that made Lena's breath catch. For a moment, their gazes locked. It wasn't a passing glance. It was a gaze that seemed to see right through her. "Middle seat," he said, his voice deep and low, with just the hint of a rough edge. Lena hesitated again, then squeezed past him, feeling the heat of his presence even as she tried to ignore it. Their shoulders brushed, and she felt a jolt of awareness she couldn't shake. No, she wouldn't let herself think about it, not now. She buckled her seatbelt quickly, trying to ignore the warmth spreading in her chest. The man beside her returned to his phone, his fingers moving with quick, precise control across the screen. Lena focused on the window, willing herself to relax, to shake off the feeling that his presence somehow filled the entire row. But the exhaustion was overwhelming. Her head drooped forward, and before she could stop it, sleep claimed her. Victor DeLuca didn't need distractions. He had enough of his own problems to handle. As the plane ascended into the air, he tried to focus on the emails and messages demanding his attention, but every time he looked down at the woman beside him, something stopped him. Her exhaustion, the way her body seemed to collapse against his shoulder, her vulnerability, it was a sharp contrast to the control he maintained in every other part of his life. She didn't seem like the type to lean on someone, to give up her space so easily, but here she was, with her head resting against his shoulder, her breathing slow and steady, completely unaware of the man beside her. Victor's gaze softened for a moment as he looked down at her. Her face was worn, tired in a way that made something inside him tighten. He had seen that kind of exhaustion before, had felt it himself. The weight of responsibilities pressing down, the constant struggle to survive, to keep everything together, no matter the cost. His phone buzzed with a message from Marco, but Victor didn't move. He remained still, letting the woman sleep. Marco would laugh if he saw this. Victor, the unshakable, actually letting a stranger rest on him, but for some reason, he didn't mind. As the flight went on, Victor did what he always did. He handled business with one hand, typed emails with the other, all while a stranger drooled slightly on his $1,500 suit. The announcement for landing jolted Lena awake. She blinked rapidly, disoriented. Her face flushed as she realized where her head had landed. Oh God. She had fallen asleep on the stranger beside her, his shoulder, to be exact. The man beside her chuckled softly, a low sound that made her cheeks burn. "I'm so sorry," she mumbled, straightening up quickly, mortified. "No problem," he replied, his tone casual. But there was something in his voice that made Lena pause. It wasn't the coldness she expected. It was almost amused. The plane had started its descent. Lena grabbed her small backpack from under the seat and tried to collect herself. The man beside her hadn't moved, still typing away on his phone. As the plane came to a stop, the bustle around them began. But Lena couldn't focus on that. She was too embarrassed. And yet, there was something about this stranger that lingered. The intensity in his gaze, the calmness in his demeanor. He wasn't just some businessman. She didn't know why, but she could tell he was someone important, someone who lived a life far removed from her own. When they exited the plane, Lena was nearly halfway down the jet bridge when the flight attendant appeared. "Ma'am, the gentleman from 24B asked if he could speak to you." Lena froze. She glanced back toward the plane, trying to hide the panic rising in her chest. What could he possibly want? She hesitated for a moment before turning around and walking back. As she stepped into the waiting area, she saw him again. Victor DeLuca. His dark eyes met hers. "I wanted to apologize for your difficult flight. Let me make it up to you. Coffee?" She didn't know what was more strange, the offer or the fact that she was considering it. But before she could answer, a text pinged on her phone. The screen showed a message from Maya's doctor. "Your balance is still due. Your daughter's treatment cannot continue without full payment." Lena's heart dropped. She forced a tight smile as she stepped away. "Thanks, but I really need to get going." Subscribe and comment below if you've ever had someone step into your life when you least expected it. Because Lena's about to discover just how far a stranger's kindness can go, and how dangerous it could turn out to be. Lena gave Victor a quick, polite smile before turning away, her heart pounding a little harder than it should have. She couldn't afford to get sidetracked, not with Maya's medication still hanging over her head. She had to figure out how to make the next payment, how to get by another month. The last thing she needed was more complications, especially from a man like him. Victor didn't move as Lena walked away, his eyes following her every step. There was something about her, something that stirred a protective instinct deep within him. He didn't know why, but he couldn't seem to shake the image of her slumped against him, utterly vulnerable. It was a strange feeling, one he wasn't used to. Lena reached the terminal, her mind already racing to find a way to make ends meet. As she pulled out her phone, trying to find a way to juggle her bills, something caught her eye. A small cream envelope, addressed to her in elegant, precise handwriting. The moment she saw it, her stomach twisted. She didn't remember receiving any mail on the flight. Hesitant, she picked it up, her fingers trembling slightly as she opened it. Inside, there was a receipt. Her eyes skimmed over the printed numbers and words. Maya's hospital bill for $60,000, marked paid in full. She blinked, reading it again, then again. The shaking in her hands grew more pronounced as her breath caught. The debt was cleared. All of it. Gone. Her eyes searched the envelope for an explanation, but there was none. Only a simple note attached to the receipt, written in the same elegant script. Not a choice. VD. She stood frozen in the terminal, the weight of the receipt heavy in her hands. It couldn't be real. Someone had paid the debt, but who and why? The realization hit her slowly, chilling her to the bone. Victor DeLuca. The man who'd helped her in a way that felt like a stranger's kindness mixed with something else. Something she couldn't quite figure out. Her fingers gripped the card he'd given her, the one she'd shoved into her purse and promptly forgotten about. Hesitantly, Lena pulled it out and stared at the contact number. For a moment, she simply stared at it, as if expecting it to vanish. But it didn't. The moment the thought crossed her mind, her phone rang. Lena glanced at the screen. The name Victor DeLuca appeared. She hesitated for a beat before answering. "Lena." Victor's voice was smooth, calm, like he'd been waiting for her. "Good morning." Lena's mind was still reeling, but she managed to force the words out. "What did you do?" "Nothing you need to worry about," Victor replied, his tone casual, almost dismissive. "Your daughter's medical debt was taken care of. The hospital should have notified you." "Why?" Lena shot back. "Why would you do that? Why would you pay for something that's none of your business?" There was a long pause, and then Victor's voice softened, though the edge was still there. "Because it's the right thing to do." "The right thing?" Lena repeated, disbelief bubbling in her chest. "Who are you to decide what's right for me? What's right for my daughter?" "I'm someone who can make sure she gets the treatment she needs," Victor said calmly. "That's what matters here." "I never asked for your help," Lena replied, her voice trembling with frustration. "I don't need charity." Victor was silent for a moment. "This isn't charity," he said finally. "This is me looking out for you, Lena, looking out for Maya." Lena's heart raced, a mix of confusion, anger, and a creeping sense of helplessness gnawing at her. "I don't want your money. I don't want your help. I can handle this on my own." "I know you can, but you're not doing it alone anymore." Victor's voice was soft but firm. Lena squeezed her eyes shut, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill over. She wanted to scream, to push him away, to refuse his help and demand that he never contact her again. But she couldn't. She couldn't even bring herself to hang up the phone. "You're making a mistake," she whispered, her voice shaking with the weight of everything she'd been carrying for so long. "You're just making things more complicated. I don't need you, Victor." The silence on the other end of the line stretched, and for a moment Lena thought he might have hung up, but then he spoke again. "I'm not asking for anything in return, Lena," he said, his voice low. "I'm just trying to make sure you and Maya are safe. That's all." Lena wanted to argue, wanted to shout that she didn't need protection, that she could protect herself, but somewhere deep inside, she knew that she didn't have the luxury of pride anymore. She had no choice but to accept his help. Victor wasn't going to let her walk away from this. He wasn't going to let her handle everything on her own. And despite every instinct that screamed for her to run, a part of her felt the smallest inkling of relief. "I have to go," Lena said, cutting through the silence. "Thank you, I guess, but I'll handle this my way." "You don't have to do anything alone," Victor replied, his voice soft but insistent. "Just keep the card. When you need me, you'll know." Lena hung up without saying another word. She stared at the business card in her hand, feeling a strange weight in her chest. What had she just agreed to? But more than that, she wondered if she could really keep the walls up between them, or if by some twist of fate she was about to let this man into her life, no matter how dangerous it might be. Lena felt a pit grow in her stomach as she left the terminal, her mind still spinning from her conversation with Victor. She couldn't deny that the debt had been one less thing to worry about, but the cost of it felt suffocating. No matter how she looked at it, she had just stepped into a world that wasn't hers, a world that felt far too dangerous for someone like her. As she walked through the crowded airport, she tried to shake off the nagging feeling at the back of her mind, focusing on the small victory that came with her daughter's medical bills being paid off. But the thought of Victor's unsettling calm, his voice like ice on the other end of the phone, wouldn't leave her. She reached the street where she had parked her car, fumbling for her keys as she felt the weight of the day settle back onto her shoulders. 1,000 thoughts raced through her mind, none of them good. She couldn't let herself get too comfortable with Victor's help, no matter how desperate her situation was. She'd been getting by just fine on her own. She had no other choice but to keep moving forward, no matter the price. But the moment her car doors clicked open, a shadow fell across her path. Lena. Her blood ran cold as she looked up, her breath catching in her throat. There, standing a few feet away, was James. Her ex, the man who had made her life hell for the past few years. He looked different now, his once clean-cut appearance replaced by a scruffier, more disheveled version of himself. His eyes, filled with anger, locked onto hers with a possessiveness that still sent chills through her body. Lena took a step back, trying to mask the terror rising in her chest. "James," she said, her voice steady despite the way her hands shook. "What are you doing here?" "You know exactly what I'm doing here," James sneered, his voice low and dangerous. "We need to talk." Lena's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the weight of his presence, the looming threat of what he could do next. He had always been like this, volatile, unpredictable. A man who had a tendency to get exactly what he wanted, no matter the cost. "I told you to leave us alone," Lena replied, her voice firm, even as her pulse quickened. "You think you can just walk away from me?" he spat, taking a step closer. "You don't get to decide that, Lena. Not when it's my daughter you're trying to take from me." Lena instinctively stepped back, placing herself between James and the open door of her car. "She's not your daughter, James. You lost that right the day you laid a hand on her." "Don't talk to me about rights," he hissed, his face contorted in rage. "You can't keep running away from me. You can't hide her from me forever." Lena's breath quickened, and she glanced around, desperate for help. The crowd around them seemed to ignore the escalating tension. It was just another fight to them, but to her, it was everything. Her safety, her daughter's future, all at stake. "I'm done with you," Lena said through clenched teeth, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and fear. "Leave us alone." James moved closer, his hand reaching out as though he could grab her. "I told you," he growled, his voice low and threatening. "This isn't over. I'll make sure you regret this." Suddenly, there was a sharp voice that cut through the tension. "Let her go!" Lena froze. She didn't even need to turn around to know who it was. Victor. Her heart skipped a beat, but she didn't dare turn. She couldn't, not with James so close, not with his fingers already reaching for her arm. "I don't think you heard me, James." Victor's voice rang out again, calm but lethal. "Let her go." James whirled around, his face flushed with anger, but the sight of Victor's dark eyes, cold and unblinking, froze him in place. "What the hell is this?" James sneered, looking Victor up and down, sizing him up. "A man who's here to make sure you don't hurt her," Victor replied smoothly. "You need to walk away." Lena could feel the shift in the air, the tension, the impending violence in Victor's words. Her heart raced, not knowing how far he was willing to go, but she could see the quiet threat in his stance. Victor wasn't someone who backed down. James, sensing the danger, took a step back. He glared at Victor for a moment before his gaze shifted back to Lena. "You think you've got it all figured out, huh?" he sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "You're nothing but a pawn in this game, Lena. He's using you, and you're too damn blind to see it." Lena's pulse thudded in her ears. Pawn. But before she could respond, James turned and stormed off, his angry footsteps echoing in the quiet of the street. Lena stood there, breathless, her heart still racing from the confrontation. Victor didn't move. His eyes were on her now, not with the coldness he had shown James, but with something softer, concern, perhaps. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle. Lena nodded, though her hands were shaking. "Yeah, I'm fine, but he's going to keep coming back. I know him." Victor stepped closer, his presence more imposing now, like a shield in the chaos. "He's not coming back," he said, his voice hard, determined. "Not if I have anything to say about it." Lena swallowed, unsure of how to feel. She hadn't wanted anyone's protection, but she realized in that moment that she had no choice. Lena barely slept that night. Her mind raced, replaying the encounter with James over and over again. His words, his threats, they seemed to echo in her head long after she'd closed her eyes. Victor's presence had calmed her at first, but now the reality of what had happened settled in. Her ex had been one step away from dragging her back into his life, and Victor had intervened with a speed and precision that left her breathless. He wasn't just a businessman, wasn't just a wealthy man in a suit. He was someone who had the power to protect her. But at what cost? She couldn't stop wondering about his motives. Why had he stepped in so easily? Why had he paid off her daughter's medical debt without her asking? He hadn't done it out of kindness. She knew that much. Victor DeLuca wasn't a man who did things without a reason. But Lena couldn't shake the fear that came with accepting his help. She had always prided herself on standing on her own 2 feet, on doing whatever it took to survive. She didn't owe anyone anything, and she didn't plan on changing that now. Yet the thought of Maya being in danger, of what might happen if James came back again, left her with a sense of helplessness she couldn't ignore. She was standing at a crossroads, and the choices she made in the next few days could change everything. The next morning, as she dropped Maya off at Mrs. Chen's, Lena found herself standing outside her small apartment, wondering if this was the right time to finally reach out to Victor. He said I could call. The memory of his words played in her mind like a mantra. But she resisted. She didn't need help. She didn't need anyone. At least that's what she told herself. Lena stood in front of the stove later that day, stirring a pot of soup, the sound of sizzling vegetables filling the kitchen. The smell was comforting, nothing fancy, just simple food for a simple life. But even as she stirred, she knew she couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. The truth was, she needed help, but that didn't mean she had to accept it from Victor. The doorbell rang, pulling her out of her thoughts. Lena wiped her hands on a dish towel and walked toward the door, not expecting anyone. When she opened it, she froze. Victor stood there, just outside the threshold. His suit was impeccably tailored, his dark eyes unblinking as he watched her, but there was no arrogance in his gaze, no calculation. There was just concern. Lena stood there for a moment, unsure what to say. She had no idea why he was here, why he'd come to her door after everything, but the look in his eyes told her that this wasn't about business. "You don't have to do this," she said, stepping back from the door, her hand resting on the frame. Victor's gaze didn't falter. He stepped forward just enough to keep the door from closing. "I'm not here for business, Lena. I'm here because you need help. I'm here because I want to help." Lena felt the pressure in her chest tighten. "I don't need anyone's help." Victor's lips pressed together in a thin line, and he stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "You do. You don't have to do this alone." Lena's frustration flared. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded, her voice rising. "What's in it for you?" Victor didn't immediately answer, his gaze flickering to the kitchen, then back to her. "What's in it for me?" he repeated quietly, almost to himself. "It's not about me, Lena. It's about you and Maya, about making sure you're both safe." Lena's pulse spiked, and she shook her head. "I'm not your charity case." "No," Victor said softly, stepping closer. "You're not. But you don't have to fight this fight alone." His words, his presence, seemed to settle into the air around them. She didn't want to admit it, didn't want to acknowledge the truth of his words, but deep down, she knew he was right. She wasn't alone, and she wasn't safe. "I can't let you do this for me," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I can't keep accepting things from you." Victor's eyes softened, and he reached out, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "Lena, you don't have to keep fighting. I know you're used to being strong, but it's okay to let someone else help. It's okay to let me help." Her chest tightened again, and the tears she'd been fighting all morning threatened to spill over. But she couldn't let them. She couldn't break down, not now, not with Victor standing in front of her, with his dark eyes filled with something she couldn't name. But what if he was right? What if she didn't have to keep doing it all by herself? "I'll help you," Victor continued, his voice low. "But on one condition. Let me protect you. Let me make sure nothing happens to you or Maya." Lena's heart raced as she fought to keep herself composed. She'd already allowed him into her life more than she'd wanted, but she was standing on the edge of a cliff now, with nowhere else to turn. For the first time, she felt the weight of her choices pressing down on her, choices she hadn't known she'd made until now. Lena spent the next few days in a fog, barely able to concentrate. She had Maya to care for, work to do, and the weight of everything pressing down on her. But beneath it all was the knowledge that things were changing, things that she had no control over. Victor's words echoed in her mind as she lay awake at night. "Let me protect you." The offer lingered in the silence of her small apartment. For the first time in years, Lena felt something close to relief, a feeling that she couldn't remember ever having before. But it came with a price. Victor hadn't just given her money. He hadn't just stepped in during the confrontation with James. He had become a part of her world, whether she liked it or not. And now, as the days passed, she found herself relying on him in ways she hadn't expected. He wasn't just a stranger anymore. It was late afternoon when Victor showed up at her door again, as unexpected as always. His sleek black car was parked outside, the tinted windows reflecting the dimming light of the day. Lena had just finished making a simple dinner for Maya, but her stomach was twisted in knots. It was as if she could feel Victor's presence before he even rang the bell. When she opened the door, she was met with his usual calm, his expensive suit as immaculate as ever. "I didn't expect to see you today," Lena said, trying to keep her voice neutral, though there was a bite to it. Victor stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, as though he had every right to be there. "I figured you'd be home," he said simply. His eyes scanned the apartment, but his gaze lingered on her for a moment too long. Lena crossed her arms over her chest, suddenly feeling small under his scrutiny. "What are you doing here?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. He had his reasons for everything, and those reasons always seemed to revolve around her. "You're still being watched," Victor said, his voice low, steady. "I know you don't want my help, but you need it, Lena. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to protect you." Lena bit back the frustration that rose in her throat. "I can take care of myself." Victor shook his head, a flicker of something in his eyes. "I'm not questioning that. I'm just here to make sure you don't have to." There it was again. The promise of protection. Lena was starting to hate the word. It felt like a chain, a weight she couldn't escape. But the truth was, she was starting to feel the pull. She didn't want to admit it, didn't want to admit how much easier it was to let someone else take the reins, especially when that someone had the resources to make everything else feel insignificant. She glanced over at Maya, who was sitting at the table, playing with her crayons. Her daughter looked up and smiled, a wide, unguarded grin. "Who's that, Mama?" Lena's heart squeezed. She had no idea what to tell Maya. How could she explain Victor? How could she explain that he was a stranger, a man whose kindness was more dangerous than any threat she'd ever faced? "Just a friend, honey," Lena said softly, forcing a smile. Victor didn't seem bothered by the label. He simply nodded and walked over to Maya's side. He crouched down to her level, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "How's the drawing going?" Victor asked, his voice gentle. Maya looked up, her face lighting up. "I'm drawing a rainbow," she exclaimed, holding up the paper for him to see. It was a haphazard mix of colors, but to Maya, it was a masterpiece. Victor smiled, a real, unguarded smile that softened his usual cold exterior. "It's beautiful," he said, his voice full of warmth. Lena watched them, her stomach knotting with an unfamiliar sensation. She didn't want to admit it, but it was hard to ignore how much Maya had warmed to Victor. And that scared her. Later that evening, after dinner and a quick story session with Maya, Lena found herself alone with Victor in the living room. The weight of the day still hung over her, but there was something different in the air now, something between them that hadn't been there before. She couldn't pinpoint it, but she felt it. The tension, the pull, the way he was looking at her like he could see everything, see past her walls, her defenses. You know, I didn't ask for any of this, Lena said, her voice quiet but firm. I didn't ask for your protection. I didn't ask for your money. I didn't ask for any of it, Victor. I know, he replied, his voice softening. He stood at the window, staring out at the street below. I'm not trying to force anything on you, Lena, but I need you to understand. I'm not going anywhere. Lena's breath hitched. What does that mean? It means I'm staying, and I'm going to keep you safe. He turned to face her, his eyes steady and unwavering. I'm not asking for anything in return, but you need to know that I'm in this, and I'm not leaving. Lena's heart pounded, but she stood her ground. You don't get to decide that for me. I know, Victor said quietly, but it's not just about you anymore. It's about Maya. And the people who want to hurt you, who think they can get away with it, I won't let them. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Lena didn't know what to say to that. She didn't know how to respond to a man who had already decided what he would do for her and her daughter. And the worst part? She was starting to believe him. The days blurred together after Victor's arrival. Despite her protests, despite her insistence that she could handle things alone, it felt like the world was conspiring to pull her into his orbit. Maya was thriving. Her cough was gone, her energy was up, and there were moments when Lena could almost pretend everything was normal. But the price of that normalcy loomed over her like a shadow she couldn't outrun. Victor's protection came with a silent agreement. He stayed close, but never too close. His presence was constant, his careful, watchful eyes always on them. It was the way he moved through her life, like a quiet storm, capable of tearing everything apart, but doing it gently, almost with care. And that terrified Lena. It was a late afternoon when Victor came to her door again, this time without the suit. He wore a simple black t-shirt, jeans and boots. Relaxed, almost casual, yet still commanding, as if he never truly let his guard down, no matter how relaxed the setting. Lena had just finished making dinner for Maya, the last of her energy spent on a half-hearted attempt at normalcy. She was putting away the leftovers when the knock came, soft but deliberate. Lena? Victor's voice was low, as it always was. Come in, she said, not looking up. Her hands lingered on the dishes, unwilling to face him. There was a long pause before Victor spoke again, this time closer. I know this isn't easy. Lena didn't reply, focusing on the sink in front of her. She was grateful for the silence, but it felt like the calm before a storm. When she finally turned around, he was standing there, watching her. Not with the cold calculation he usually wore, but with something else. A quiet understanding. It unsettled her. Why are you here? She asked, her voice strained. She wanted to push him away, keep him at arm's length, but the truth was, she couldn't ignore the way her heart raced when he was near, the way she had started to depend on his presence. I think you need to know more about me, about why I'm here. Victor's words were deliberate, his eyes never leaving hers. Lena felt a knot form in her stomach. I don't want to know. It's not my business. It is, though, Victor said, his voice steady. It's all connected. You're in this, whether you want to be or not. And the more you know, the easier it'll be to understand why I'm not leaving. Why I won't let you go back to the life you had before. Lena crossed her arms, defensive. I don't need saving, Victor. You might not think you do, but you do, he said quietly. And Maya does too. There was an intensity in his voice, one that was impossible to ignore. Lena shifted uncomfortably, turning back to the sink, trying to focus on something else. She wanted to shut him out, but she couldn't. Victor took a deep breath. You don't have to trust me, but you need to understand. I've been where you are. Lena looked up at him, her brow furrowing. What do you mean? I lost everything once, he said. His voice softer now, as though the words cost him. My wife, my daughter, the family I was supposed to protect. Lena's heart clenched as she took a step back, her defenses weakening. What happened? Victor's eyes darkened, and for the first time, she saw something raw in them, something that wasn't just control or power, it was grief, unspoken and unbearable. We were targeted by a rival family, Victor continued, his voice quiet, almost haunted. It was supposed to be me. I was supposed to die that day, but they killed my wife and daughter instead. The bomb was meant for me. They were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Lena's breath caught in her throat, and for the first time, she saw him not as the powerful, detached billionaire, but as a man who had suffered in ways she couldn't begin to imagine. The walls between them seemed to crack just slightly. "I'm sorry," Lena whispered, unsure of what else to say. Victor didn't respond immediately. He stepped closer, his gaze intense as he locked eyes with her. "I couldn't protect them, and that's something I'll never be able to forgive myself for." Lena felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected the man standing in front of her to have lost so much. "That's why I'm doing this," Victor said, his voice low but firm. "That's why I'm here. To make sure that you and Maya don't become another reminder of my failure." Lena's heart twisted. She didn't know what to say, didn't know how to process everything he had just shared with her. It felt like too much, too soon. She didn't want to rely on him, she didn't want to need him. But she couldn't ignore the part of her that felt a pull toward him, toward the promise he offered. She had spent so long fighting, surviving on her own. But now, with Victor's words hanging in the air, she began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she wasn't meant to do this alone anymore. "I never wanted to bring this on you," Victor continued, his voice softer now, vulnerable. "But I'm here, Lena. I won't let you go through what I did." Lena swallowed, the tightness in her chest becoming almost unbearable. She wasn't sure what to do with the feelings swirling inside her, with the knowledge that Victor's past was wrapped up in the very thing that was pulling her deeper into his world. But one thing was certain. The more she learned about him, the harder it would be to keep her distance. Lena barely had time to breathe before the chaos came crashing down on her once again. The calm that had settled over the past few days was shattered the moment she saw the familiar figure standing just outside her apartment building, a look of smugness in his eyes. James was back. She froze for a moment, her pulse racing as memories of his anger, his violence, flooded her mind. He had come back before, demanding she return to him, threatening her, threatening Maya, but now it was different. There was something in the way he held himself, a coldness in his posture that made the air feel thick with tension. Lena instinctively stepped in front of Maya, who had been playing with her toys on the living room floor. She could feel the heat of her daughter's presence behind her, the familiar weight of her child's safety pressing against her every thought. "What do you want?" Lena asked, trying to keep her voice steady, but even she could hear the tremor in her words. James sneered, his eyes narrowing. "We need to talk, Lena. You can't keep hiding from me." "I've told you, it's over. Stay away from me," Lena said, her voice gaining strength. But she could feel her legs shaking, the old fear creeping back into her chest. James took a step closer, and then another. His eyes were wild now, something far more dangerous than the anger she remembered. It was desperation. He wasn't leaving without getting what he thought was owed to him, and that terrified Lena. "You don't get to decide when it's over, Lena. We're not done. Not until I say we are," he growled, his face flushed with fury. "I don't need you. Maya doesn't need you. We're fine without you," Lena shot back, her voice sharp and full of resolve. Her heart pounded in her chest as James came within arm's reach. He reached out to grab her arm, but Lena instinctively jerked back, her breathing shallow. "Maya is my daughter too, Lena," he snarled, "and I'm not going to let you take her away from me." Lena's breath caught in her throat, her heart stopping at the thought of him trying to hurt her daughter. That's all James had ever done. Hurt her, hurt Maya. And now, It seemed like he was willing to do anything to force his way back into their lives. No. The word came out more forcefully than Lena expected. You'll never see her again. Suddenly, the door to the apartment swung open with a force that startled both of them. Victor. He stood there, his presence almost suffocating, his dark eyes fixed on James with a cold intensity that made the air around them feel 10 degrees colder. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. James looked from Victor to Lena, and the shift in the atmosphere was palpable. Victor was not someone James could intimidate. Leave. Now. Victor's voice was low, controlled, but full of the kind of threat that made everything else in the room feel insignificant. James looked back at Lena, his fists clenched. You don't know who you're dealing with, DeLuca, he spat, his voice trembling with rage. I know exactly who I'm dealing with, Victor replied, his gaze never leaving James. And I don't give second chances to people like you. James hesitated for a moment, his bravado faltering as he looked at Victor. But there was still something in his eyes, a stubborn refusal to back down. You think you can just come in here and scare me off? You don't know how deep my ties go, Victor. I'll make sure you regret this. Victor took a step forward, his calm demeanor never wavering, but there was a dangerous edge to his movements now. You have 3 seconds to walk away before I make this a very different situation for you. James's eyes flicked to Victor's associates, who had silently appeared in the hallway, standing as a silent barrier between him and any escape. James swallowed hard, looking from Victor to Lena and back again. This is the kind of mistake you don't come back from, Victor said, his voice cold and final. The tension in the room was unbearable. James took a shaky step back, his fists clenched, his face flushed with humiliation. I'm not done with you, he said under his breath, his words laced with venom. You'll regret this. Without another word, James turned on his heel and stormed out of the apartment, his footsteps echoing down the hall. Victor stood motionless for a moment, his dark eyes scanning the hallway as if ensuring that James wouldn't make a second attempt. When he finally turned back toward Lena, his expression softened, though the fire in his gaze was still there. You're safe, he said quietly, almost to himself. He won't hurt you again. Lena stood frozen, her chest tight with the aftermath of the confrontation. She couldn't believe what had just happened, how quickly it had escalated. The reality of what she had just witnessed, the coldness in Victor's eyes, the ruthless protection he offered, sent a shiver through her spine. I don't want this, Lena whispered, her voice shaky. I didn't want this life. I didn't want to be protected by someone like you. Victor met her gaze, his expression unreadable, but there was a softness in his eyes that made her heart ache. I don't want you to need this protection either. But you do, Lena, and I'm not going anywhere. The following days passed in a blur of quiet tension. Lena couldn't shake the feeling that things were spiraling out of her control, that the life she'd fought so hard to build on her own was slipping away, piece by piece. Victor was still there. Not physically, always, but in the shadows of her life, watching, ensuring her safety. He had assigned security around her apartment building, installed cameras without asking her permission, and even arranged for someone to watch over Maya when she went to school. Lena couldn't escape the thought that she was living under someone else's control. She didn't want it, didn't need it, and yet, each time she thought about what would happen if Victor wasn't there, her chest tightened with fear. She wanted to deny the truth. She wanted to fight the safety, the comfort he offered. But she couldn't. She couldn't keep pretending that she wasn't grateful for his help, that she wasn't grateful that he was here to protect them, no matter how much she hated the idea of owing him anything. But now, standing in her kitchen, staring at the small pile of bills that still awaited her attention, Lena knew she was about to face the truth. Her phone buzzed on the counter, snapping her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen and saw Victor's name. Why is he calling me again? She thought, a flash of irritation rising in her chest. With a quick breath, she picked up. Victor, she said, keeping her tone as neutral as possible. "Lena," his voice was low, smooth, but with an unmistakable edge. "We need to talk." Lena's stomach flipped, a mixture of dread and confusion washing over her. "About what?" "The situation with James," he replied. "I've been watching his movements. I don't think he's going to stop until he gets what he wants." Lena's heart rate spiked. "What are you talking about?" she asked, the panic creeping into her voice. "I thought you said he wouldn't hurt us again." Victor's silence on the other end was palpable, thick with something Lena couldn't quite decipher. She waited, listening to the quiet hum of the phone line before he finally spoke again, his tone changing. "He has connections. He's not alone in this." Lena felt the weight of his words. It was like a door had opened into a world she had tried so hard to avoid, a world of power and influence far beyond her reach. She had thought James was the problem, that he was the source of her fear. But now, Victor was telling her that it wasn't just James. There was something much bigger at play. Her chest tightened. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice shaking. "James has ties with people in my world, Lena," Victor said, his voice steady, almost calm. "And those people? They don't take kindly to me interfering in their business. They've made it clear they want to finish what they started." Lena felt her blood run cold. "So, what does that mean for us?" she whispered, dreading the answer. Victor's voice was darker now, sharper. "It means we're both in danger." Lena's grip on the phone tightened, her breath catching in her throat. In danger. She had thought that the worst was over, that everything was in the past, but now, it was clear that the danger wasn't just something she could outrun. The danger had followed her. "I need you to listen to me, Lena," Victor continued, his voice cutting through her fear. "I'm doing everything I can to keep you and Maya safe, but this is going to escalate. I can't promise it'll be over soon." "Then what do you want from me?" Lena asked, the words slipping out before she could stop them. She hated how vulnerable she sounded, hated how much she was relying on him. "I want you to trust me," Victor replied, his tone softening just slightly. "Let me handle this. Let me protect you. I'm not asking you to accept anything else. Just trust that this isn't something I can fix by sending a few people to watch over you." Lena stood there, the weight of his words settling deep in her chest. She wanted to scream at him, to push him away, to tell him that she didn't need his protection, that she could handle things on her own. But the truth was, she didn't know if she could. Victor had stepped into her life in a way no one else had. His world, his rules, his resources. It was all too much for her to process, but his protection was real, and she couldn't deny that. The thought of running, of walking away from him, from his world, felt like a dream that was already slipping away from her. "Okay," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll trust you. For now." Victor's exhale on the other end of the line was faint, but it held something that made Lena pause, a brief moment of relief. "I won't let anyone hurt you, I promise." Lena didn't say anything in response. She couldn't find the words. Not now, and just like that, the deal was made. The next few days were a blur. Lena and Maya remained in her apartment, the usual routines carrying them through the hours, but Lena's mind was never far from the conversation with Victor. The promise he made, the weight of his words, it lingered in her every step. She knew this wasn't the life she had imagined for herself, it wasn't the future she'd planned, but as the days wore on, Lena realized something she hadn't wanted to admit. She was already in his world, whether she liked it or not, and the longer she stayed, the harder it would be to escape. The night was unnaturally quiet, the city's usual hum muted by a thick veil of tension. Lena sat on the couch, her hands clenched into fists on her lap, her mind racing with the enormity of everything that had happened in the past week. James was gone for now, and the security measures Victor had put in place were making her feel slightly less exposed. But the unease in her stomach refused to dissipate. The people Victor had warned her about, the ones who wanted to make sure he didn't interfere in their business, were still out there, still watching. She had seen the look in his eyes that morning, the calmness that veiled a depth of fear. Not for himself, but for her, for Maya. Lena couldn't help but wonder how much longer she could keep up this facade of not needing him, of maintaining control. The truth was, she was scared. Scared for herself, scared for her daughter, and, despite everything, scared of what Victor could do to her heart. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She didn't have to look through the peephole to know who it was. The feeling of his presence had become so familiar, so constant that she could feel it even before he arrived. Victor. She took a deep breath before opening the door. He was standing there as usual, perfectly composed, but tonight there was something different about him. His eyes were harder than she remembered, and his jaw was clenched in a way that made him look even more formidable than usual. "What is it?" she asked, her voice calm, but her pulse racing. Victor didn't answer immediately. He stepped inside, his gaze sweeping the apartment. He didn't make eye contact with her just yet. When he finally turned to face her, the words came out with a quiet intensity. "I've taken care of James. He won't be coming back." Lena swallowed. The relief she'd expected didn't come. It never did when Victor was around. He made everything feel like it was part of a larger game, and she didn't know if she wanted to play anymore. "Then what now?" Lena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor's gaze softened, but there was still an edge to it. He crossed the room slowly, moving toward her with purpose. "I need you to understand, Lena," he said, his voice low. "I didn't get into this to hurt you. I didn't get into this to control you, but I'm not leaving, not until you're safe." Lena felt the air thicken between them, the space between them growing smaller, more charged. "I can't keep doing this," she said suddenly, her voice trembling despite herself. "I don't know what you want from me, Victor. I can't be a part of your world. You're telling me you're protecting me, but I feel like I'm suffocating." Victor didn't move. His eyes stayed on hers, his expression unreadable. "Is that what you think?" he asked softly, his voice quiet, but full of a kind of sadness that made Lena's chest ache. Lena nodded, unable to hold back the tears that had been threatening for days. "I'm not who you think I am," she continued, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm not someone who needs protecting. I've spent my whole life keeping my head above water, and now you're asking me to trust you, to trust that you'll keep me safe. I can't keep pretending this is okay." Victor stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, and for the first time in weeks, Lena allowed herself to feel the weight of his emotion. She saw the flash of something in his eyes, something raw, something that made her breath catch. "I know," he said quietly. "I know you don't want this. You don't want me, not like this. But I don't know how else to make you see that I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going to walk away from you, not after everything." Lena felt the world shift beneath her feet. She had wanted to believe she could keep pushing him away. She wanted to believe she could protect Maya and herself without relying on him, but the truth was, she couldn't. She wasn't as strong as she pretended to be. She needed someone. He was someone. "I didn't ask for this life," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I didn't ask for you to come into my life and make it all so complicated." Victor's face softened, and he reached out to touch her arm. It was the gentlest of gestures, but it held more weight than anything else. "I know. I never wanted to make things more difficult. I never wanted you to feel like this was something you didn't choose." He paused, his hand still on her arm. "But I'm here, Lena, and I'm not leaving. I'm not going to let you do this alone." Lena closed her eyes, the weight of his words settling over her like a blanket. She felt his hand on her arm, felt the warmth of him close by. For a moment, the storm inside her quieted, the chaos in her heart stilled. She opened her eyes and met his gaze. "I'm scared," she whispered. I don't know what you're asking of me, but I'm scared of what it means. What it means for Maya, what it means for me." Victor's eyes softened, and for the first time, Lena saw the man behind the power, the man who was trying to fix everything, trying to protect what he had lost. "I'm asking you to trust me," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "And I'm asking you to let me protect you. Let me make sure you're safe. You don't have to choose between me and your independence. You can have both, but you have to trust me." Lena stood there, her mind racing. She was standing on the edge, ready to fall into the unknown, into a world she didn't understand. But Victor's words, his promise, held something she couldn't deny. Safety, a future, perhaps, without fear. She felt the weight of her decision settle into her chest. "I'll trust you," she whispered. "For now." Victor's expression softened with relief, and for the first time in weeks, Lena felt the weight on her shoulders lighten. But she knew the truth. Nothing in this world, or with Victor, was ever as simple as it seemed.